After the Confederation delegation departed the United Nations Assembly, Dr. Elena Reyes found herself alone in the observation deck overlooking New York Harbor. The alien vessel hovered above the water, its crystalline surface reflecting the setting sun in fractals of light that danced across the waves. Beautiful, yet somehow cold, much like their owners. "They don't see us clearly," came a voice from behind her. Admiral John Wei joined her at the glass, his uniform impeccable despite the 16-hour diplomatic marathon. But then again, most species fail to recognize strength different from their own. Elena nodded, pulling up data on her tablet. The Verax evolved on a high-gravity world with constant tectonic activity. Their exoskeletons developed to withstand physical pressure we can barely imagine. To them, our softness looks like weakness. "And what does Venpor think?" Zhang asked, referencing the six-eyed Mithrai scholar who had shown genuine interest during the proceedings. "He's different. The Mithrai evolved as prey species who survive through observation and adaptation, rather than physical dominance." She scrolled through her notes. "He asked for permission to study our historical records, particularly how human civilizations responded to catastrophic events." Zhang raised an eyebrow. "Interesting focus. I thought so too." Elena deactivated her tablet. "I've granted him access to the global archive. Let him see what we're really made of." 3 days later, Elena found Venpor in the archive's holographic chamber, surrounded by floating images of human history. The rebuilding of London after the Great Fire, Tokyo rising from earthquake rubble, New Orleans reimagined after Hurricane Katrina, Kiev's restoration following the resource wars. "Fascinating patterns," Venpor remarked, his translator conveying genuine wonder. "Your species doesn't simply reconstruct. You reimagine and improve." His 6 eyes blinked in their curious sequential pattern. Most Confederation species build to last eternally. When structures fail, it creates existential crisis. "Humans know nothing lasts forever," Elena replied. "We build expecting eventual change." Venpor manipulated the holographic controls, bringing up images of refugee innovations during various human crises. These solutions, created under extreme duress, later became standard technologies. "Yes." Elena nodded. "Necessity drives innovation. We have a saying, pressure makes diamonds." "Yet you are not diamonds," Venpor observed. "You lack the crystalline structure the Verax revere." "A metaphor," Elena smiled, though perhaps not the best one for this particular conversation. Later that evening, Elena's secure channel activated with an incoming transmission from the Confederation vessel. Ambassador Krelfax appeared on screen, his crystalline features rigidly formal. "Dr. Rice, the Confederation Council has reached a preliminary assessment of Earth. You will be permitted limited trade access and restricted information exchange appropriate for Class C designation." Elena maintained a diplomatic smile, despite the insult of such a low classification. "We appreciate the Confederation's consideration." "Do not misunderstand," Krelfax continued. "This classification is provisional. The Council remains unconvinced of humanity's potential contribution to galactic affairs." After the transmission ended, Elena received a private message from Venpor. "Classifications can change. Dr. Reyes, the Mithrai were once designated Class D. We rose through observation and patience. Sometimes being underestimated creates its own advantages." Elena smiled at the message. The aliens had much to learn about humanity's capacity for rising to challenges. Perhaps being dismissed as soft would ultimately work in Earth's favor. The command center fell silent after Admiral Zhang's speech. Outside, the sky had turned a sickly orange-gray. Atmospheric debris from the multiple impact sites, mixing with smoke from burning cities. Communications Officer Lieutenant Sarah Chen turned away from her makeshift console, her face illuminated by the flickering emergency lights. "Sir, we've established contact with 7 other command posts globally. 4 in the Americas, 2 in Africa, 1 in Australia." She hesitated. "Nothing from Europe or most of Asia yet." Zhang nodded grimly. Keep trying. What about the Confederation vessels? They're maintaining high orbit. Their latest transmission suggests they're preparing evacuation shuttles for. She checked her notes. Essential personnel and genetic diversity preservation. Translation. They'll take our scientists and a breeding sample. Major Kaminsky muttered from where he was reinforcing a damaged wall section. How generous. Zhang studied the cracked display showing Earth's devastated surface. The asteroid cluster had been precisely targeted, a level of accuracy that couldn't possibly be natural. Major population centers, key infrastructure nodes, and primary food production regions had been hit with devastating precision. This was an attack, not a natural disaster. Lieutenant, send our response to the Confederation. Thank them for their offer, but inform them that Earth will manage its own evacuation priorities. Zhang's voice was level, betraying none of the fury and grief churning inside him. Sir, Chen looked uncertain. You heard me, Lieutenant. He turned to the assembled staff. I want 3 things immediately: a full inventory of remaining resources, connection to all functioning military and civilian authorities, and a global broadcast capability. What will you tell people? Asked Dr. Reyes, who had arrived from the medical bay, her lab coat stained with blood from treating the injured. That we're not leaving. Zhang pointed to the planet display. The impacts were calculated to destroy, not eradicate. They hit our centers but left infrastructure gaps. Rural areas, smaller cities, hardened military installations. Many are damaged but functional. He switched the display to show a geological survey. Most underground aquifers remain intact. Seed banks in Norway, Mexico, and New Zealand were specifically designed to survive extinction-level events. Dr. Reyes approached the display. The atmospheric contamination will trigger at least 2 years of reduced sunlight and agricultural difficulty. Which is why we start now. Zhang highlighted regions on the display. These areas will remain viable for modified agriculture. We have experts in closed-system farming and vertical agriculture who've been preparing for climate collapse scenarios for decades. Outside, the building shuddered as another aftershock rippled through the region. Dust rained from the ceiling. Admiral, Major Kaminsky spoke up. With respect, the Confederation offers ready-made survival. They have habitable worlds, advanced technology. And they've classified us as barely worth saving. Zhang interrupted. What happens to species the Confederation relocates, Lieutenant Chen? Chen consulted her notes from first contact briefings. They're integrated into specialized labor roles suitable for their abilities and provided with cultural preservation zones. Cultural zoos, Zhang corrected. Controlled environments where they can watch their heritage become a curiosity. I won't oversee humanity's transition into a galactic footnote. As if in response, the emergency lights steadied for the first time in hours. The backup generators had finally stabilized. We're staying, John repeated, looking each person in the eye. And we're rebuilding. Not because it's easy, but because it's who we are. The asteroids didn't just hit cities and infrastructure. They hit human beings. And if there's one thing humans have always excelled at, it's refusing to stay down when knocked to the ground. Venpor followed Quame OC through Renaissance Zone 7, recording everything with his ocular implants. Children waved excitedly at the six-eyed alien before returning to their lessons beneath the colorful canopy. The contrast between their laughter and the devastated skyline beyond the settlement's boundaries created a cognitive dissonance that Venpor struggled to process. Your young seem remarkably adjusted, Venpor observed as they passed a group constructing a scale model of their settlement from reclaimed materials. Children adapt faster than adults, Ose replied, stopping to help a young boy secure a miniature solar panel to the model. Perfect, Jamal. Remember how we angled the real ones? The boy nodded eagerly and adjusted his creation. But they witnessed planetary devastation. Venpor pressed. Confederation psychological models indicate generational trauma should manifest as severe behavioral dysfunction. Ose smiled. We don't hide what happened from them, but we show them we're rebuilding. Children need two things after trauma: honesty about what occurred and evidence that recovery is possible. He gestured toward the settlement center. We've built memorials alongside schools. We honor what was lost while creating what comes next. They approached a circular structure where 20 adults of various ages worked at salvaged computers and hand-drawn maps. A woman with intricate scarification on her face, ritual mourning marks, Venpor realized, coordinated their efforts from a central table. Our mapping division, Osai explained. They're documenting environmental changes, identifying viable agriculture zones, and planning future expansions. You're planning beyond survival. Venpor's translator couldn't fully convey his astonishment. The woman looked up from her work. Survival was year one, she said matter-of-factly. We're well past that. Later, in Dr. Rai's laboratory, Venpor observed as she enhanced microscopic images of cellular samples. These adaptations shouldn't be possible, she explained, excitement evident in her voice despite her exhaustion. Human cellular structures are showing accelerated evolution in response to environmental changes. Radiation resistance, enhanced repair mechanisms, more efficient oxygen utilization. Spontaneous beneficial mutation is exceedingly rare, Venpor noted, studying the images. The Confederation has documented only 17 cases across 9,000 species. Dr. Reyes looked up from her microscope. That's because most species either resist change or succumb to it. Humans have always existed in a middle state, changing enough to survive without losing our essential nature. Venpor considered this. Your mythology reflects this characteristic. I've studied your phoenix symbolism, death, and rebirth through fire. A common theme across human cultures, Rice agreed. We've always understood that transformation often requires destruction of what came before. As evening approached, Venpor stood at the settlement's edge, watching humans return from expeditions into the ruins. They carried salvaged materials, recovered technology, and occasionally, treasured personal items discovered in the rubble. A team unloaded seedlings grown from pre-impact seed stocks, carefully placing them in the newly constructed greenhouse. An elderly man approached, offering Venpor a cup of steaming liquid. Tea, he explained. From plants we're learning to grow in the new soil conditions. Venpor accepted the cup, noting how the man's hand showed signs of recent radiation exposure treatment. You were a radiation victim. The man nodded. Still am. But while I'm here, I'm teaching agricultural chemistry to the young ones. Knowledge transfer is essential for rebuilding. You speak of rebuilding while still suffering the effects that should prevent it, Venpor observed. The man smiled gently. That's the human way. We don't wait until suffering ends to begin healing. They happen simultaneously. The recovery operation at the seed vault pushed forward despite the howling winds. Rain fell sideways, stinging exposed skin like tiny needles. Captain Patel secured her weather gear and checked the structural integrity monitors on her wrist display. The vault entrance, buried beneath tons of collapsed concrete and twisted metal, was nearly accessible. How frequent are these weather patterns? Lieutenant Drazkor asked, his crystalline form vibrating slightly in the wind. Despite his evident discomfort, Patel noted the genuine curiosity in his question. This region sees approximately 27 major storm systems annually now, she replied, gesturing a team forward as the excavation drones cleared another section. The impact altered oceanic currents and atmospheric pressure gradients. We've adapted our architecture and operations accordingly. Drazkor studied the human workers moving efficiently through conditions that would halt most Confederation operations. Your species shows remarkable environmental tolerance. Necessity, Patel said simply. Earth has always had extreme environments. Now we have different ones. A warning alarm blared as sensors detected structural instability in the excavation site. Workers immediately shifted to predetermined backup positions while engineers assessed the threat. Patil watched Drazkor observe this seamless transition. No verbal commands were issued, he noted. How did they know? Practiced protocols. Everyone understands their role and contingency positions. She checked her display. We've run similar operations 73 times in the past year. Different locations, same principles. The structural integrity warning escalated to critical. Engineers frantically worked to stabilize the collapsing entrance, while medical teams moved into position. Patil sprinted forward to assist an engineering team struggling with a support beam. Drazkor followed, his crystalline form providing natural strength advantage. Together with 3 human engineers, they managed to secure the beam. The immediate danger passed, but strain lines appeared across Drazkor's exoskeleton, the Varak's equivalent of muscle fatigue. "You require rest," Patil observed. "Return to the medical station." "I can continue," Drazkor insisted, though his form trembled visibly. "This isn't about proving anything," Patil said firmly. "We rotate personnel to maintain operational effectiveness. Rest isn't weakness, it's strategy." As Drazkor reluctantly retreated to the medical station, the excavation team breached the vault entrance. Cheers erupted despite the punishing weather. Inside, remarkably preserved thanks to redundant protective systems, lay thousands of seed varieties from pre-impact ecosystems. Later, as recovery teams cataloged their precious find, Drazkor approached Patil in the command tent. His crystalline form had stabilized after treatment, but fine fracture lines remained visible across his surface. "Your people celebrated accessing those seeds as if discovering valuable minerals," he observed. "Yet they are merely plant reproductive materials." Patil projected images of projected cultivation zones across the tactical display. "These aren't just seeds, Lieutenant. They're potential. Each one represents an ecosystem that can be reestablished." The Confederation assessment indicated Earth's original biosphere was irreversibly compromised, Drazkor stated. "Irreversible by your models," Patil corrected. "We're writing new ones." She expanded the display to show progression maps spanning the next decade. "Today's seed vault recovery advances our timeline by approximately 14 months. We'll begin germination trials next week and selective planting within 60 days. Drazkor studied the human's confident expression. "You truly believe you can restore what was lost?" Patil's eyes reflected the projected images of future green spaces spreading across currently barren zones. "Not restore. Transform. The Earth that was is gone. We're building the Earth that will be." The rescue team moved with practiced efficiency through the tunnel collapse. Dr. Maya Chen watched from the command post alongside the Confederation's psychological research team, their expressions unreadable as they monitored human vital signs and stress indicators. "Their fear responses are clearly activated," noted the lead researcher, a tall Mithrai named Sevlith. "Yet cognitive function remains unimpaired." "Fascinating." Dr. Chen studied the neural readings. "Humans don't shut down during fear responses. We've evolved to think clearly while afraid. Those who didn't survive to pass on their genes." The monitors showed the rescue team reaching the trapped workers. Medical data streamed in as they assessed injuries and began evacuation procedures. One rescuer's vitals spiked dangerously as a secondary collapse threatened their position. "Subject exhibits extreme stress markers," Sevlith observed. "Yet performance metrics remain stable." "She's terrified," Dr. Chen translated, "and still doing her job perfectly." After the successful rescue, the Confederation researchers requested brain scans of the team. The results prompted an emergency conference with their superiors via quantum link. Dr. Chen waited patiently as they debated in their native language, their translator devices deactivated for privacy. When they returned, Sevlith appeared disturbed. "We have observed a phenomenon unknown in Confederation psychology. Your species intentionally processes and integrates traumatic experiences rather than compartmentalizing them. It's how we heal," Dr. Chen explained. "Compartmentalization is a temporary survival mechanism, not a permanent solution. But the emotional toll," Sevlith began, "is necessary." Chen finished. "Pain avoided becomes pain prolonged." That evening, the community gathered for their weekly restoration circle, part therapy, Part planning session, part celebration. The Confederation observers watched as people shared both struggles and achievements. A teenage girl wept while describing nightmares of the impact. Moments later, she proudly displayed architectural drawings for a new community center. The emotional oscillation should be destabilizing. Sevlith whispered to Chen. Yet it appears to create cohesion. Because it's honest, Chen replied. Pretending we're not damaged would create distance between us. Sharing our brokenness connects us. After the gathering, Chen invited the researchers to visit the memorial garden, a circular space where personal items recovered from the impact zones were arranged in artistic patterns. People moved quietly through the displays, some leaving small tokens, others simply touching items as they passed. This contradicts Confederation crisis protocols, Sevlith noted. We recommend avoiding reminders of traumatic events during rebuilding phases. Chen watched an elderly man showing his granddaughter a singed photograph recovered from their former home. Humans don't rebuild by forgetting what was lost. We rebuild while carrying our losses with us. That burden should slow your progress, another researcher commented. It does sometimes, Chen acknowledged. But it also fuels it. Our grief and our hope aren't separate emotions. They're interconnected. As they left the garden, the night sky briefly cleared, revealing stars between storm clouds. A child pointed upward, asking her mother if the bad aliens would return with more asteroids. I don't know, the mother answered honestly. But I know we survived the first time, and we're stronger now. The child accepts this uncertainty, Sevlith observed with surprise. No false reassurance was offered. Another human strength, Chen explained. We can face uncertainty without paralysis. We don't need guarantees to move forward. Within 48 hours of accepting the challenge, Admiral Zhang convened what humanity now called the Phoenix Council, a diverse group of scientists, engineers, and recovery specialists from across the surviving settlements. Dr. Rice presented her controversial bioremediation approach, while Confederation observers watched with barely concealed skepticism. Traditional terraforming would require 27 years minimum, she explained, gesturing to the holographic model of the European peninsula. Instead, we'll deploy engineered microorganisms that combine extremophile durability with the adaptive mutations we've documented in post-impact human cells. A Confederation scientist interrupted. Such organisms would require centuries of evolution to develop naturally. We don't have centuries, Dr. Rice replied calmly. So we're accelerating the process. She displayed microscopic images of the engineered microbes. These organisms process radiation, break down toxic compounds, and prepare soil for secondary regeneration phases. They're designed to multiply rapidly, then self-terminate once environmental markers reach specified thresholds. This approach has never been attempted at planetary scale, Supreme Counselor Drelvac objected. Not by the Confederation, Zhang corrected. Humans have been practicing bioremediation since the 21st century, just at smaller scales. Later, as initial deployment preparations proceeded at remarkable speed, Venpor sought out Kwei Mosi, now appointed chief engineer of the Phoenix Initiative. He found him reviewing structural designs for the deployment facilities that would be constructed within the contaminated zone. You're building permanent structures in the radiation zone? Venpor asked, examining the plans. Osei nodded. The deployment teams will need housing and laboratories on site. We can't waste time commuting from safe zones. But the radiation levels are manageable with proper shielding and rotation schedules. Osei finished. We've developed radiation-resistant building materials using techniques from Renaissance Zone 7. Venpor studied the human's face. You designed those structures. My team did, Osei confirmed. We'll be the first construction crew on site. You're voluntarily entering a lethal environment. Osei's expression remained steady. Someone has to build the first wall, set the first foundation. The microbes will begin the healing process, but they need a base of operations. The first deployment teams departed 3 weeks later, far faster than Confederation models had predicted possible. Dr. Rice supervised the loading of specialized containment units onto transport vessels, each containing billions of the engineered microorganisms. The Confederation still believes this approach will fail, she remarked to Zhang as they watched the final preparations. Their models can't account for our methods. Their models are built on Confederation thinking, Zhang replied. They've never faced extinction and chosen to rebuild rather than relocate. Are we certain the microbes will function as designed? Dr. Rice asked quietly, a rare moment of doubt crossing her features. The radiation levels are even higher than our initial readings suggested. Zhang studied the determination in the eyes of the departing teams. The microbes are like us, Alina, engineered from the same resilient stock that survived the impact. If we can adapt, so can they. As the deployment vessels lifted off, the gathered humans cheered despite the enormity of the challenge ahead. The Confederation representatives remained silent, their expressions unreadable as they observed this display of what they considered irrational optimism. Only Venpor stepped forward, approaching Zhang with an unexpected gesture, the formal Mithrai acknowledgement of a worthy endeavor. Your people attempt what our models deem impossible, he stated. Whatever the outcome, this effort deserves recognition. General Mokveri watched the human chain from his elevated observation platform. The machinery designed to distribute the second-phase bioremediation organisms had failed catastrophically, threatening the entire timeline. Confederation protocols would have mandated immediate retreat, reassessment, and equipment redesign, a process that would take months. Instead, thousands of humans formed living distribution networks, passing containers hand-to-hand through the partially detoxified zones. Their environmental suits, designed for brief exposure, were being pushed well beyond safety parameters. Yet they continued with methodical precision. Their radiation badges are showing dangerous accumulation. Mokveri noted to the Phoenix Initiative's operations director, a former emergency management specialist named Maya Liu. Why not rotate them out more frequently? We're rotating as quickly as possible while maintaining the distribution chain, Liu replied, her eyes never leaving the logistics display. Everyone understands the stakes. They're accepting cellular damage, Mokveri stated. His crystalline form reflected the red warning indicators flashing across the command center screens. Damage that our medical teams can address later, Liu corrected. The priority is maintaining the remediation timeline. A section of the human chain faltered as 2 workers collapsed from exhaustion. Within seconds, replacements moved into position. The fallen workers quickly evacuated to medical stations. The distribution flow continued without interruption. How do they maintain formation without central coordination? Mokveri asked, genuinely curious. They're not mindless drones requiring constant direction, Liu replied with unexpected sharpness. They see what needs doing, and they do it. As dawn approached on the 3rd day, Mokveri joined Admiral Zhang at the forward command post. The human looked exhausted but showed no signs of yielding his position. Medical data scrolled across his display. Hundreds of humans being treated for radiation exposure, physical exhaustion, and environmental stress injuries. Your people are breaking themselves to save this timeline, Mokveri observed. Zhang nodded. Breaking, yes, but not irrevocably. The Varaks consider permanent damage unacceptable, Mokveri explained. We would never authorize actions that compromised physical integrity. Different evolution, different values, Zhang replied. Your exoskeletons either withstand pressure or shatter. Our bodies bend, tear, and heal, often stronger than before. A communication officer interrupted with urgent news. The 3rd distribution sector had completed its deployment. Cheers erupted across the command center as the remediation tracking system showed the microorganisms successfully activating. Despite the equipment failure, the Phoenix Initiative remained on schedule. Later, as medical teams processed the final rotation of distribution workers, Mokveri observed the humans' interactions. Despite their exhaustion and injuries, they displayed remarkable social cohesion. Checking on each other, sharing recovery resources, even finding moments for laughter. Your people are celebrating despite their physical deterioration, Mokveri noted to Quamose, who was receiving treatment for radiation burns on his hands. We're celebrating because we succeeded together, Ose explained, wincing as regenerative gel was applied to his damaged skin. The pain is temporary. The achievement endures. But some damage may be permanent, Mokveri countered, gesturing to a worker receiving treatment for more severe exposure. Yes, Ose acknowledged without hesitation. And she knew that risk when she volunteered. We all did. For what purpose would you accept permanent diminishment? Mokveri asked, genuinely struggling to understand. Osai looked across the medical bay at his fellow workers, his expression thoughtful. Because sometimes, General, strength isn't measured by what you can endure without changing. It's measured by what you're willing to sacrifice to create something that outlasts you. After the formal reclassification ceremony, Earth hosted the first-ever human-organized Confederation gathering. The event took place in a vast transparent dome overlooking the restored European peninsula. What had been toxic wasteland 12 months earlier now supported specialized vegetation designed by Dr. Ray's team. Hardy plants with deep root systems that continued the bioremediation process while stabilizing the recovering soil. Admiral Zhang welcomed representatives from 27 Confederation species. Many had traveled specifically to witness what their own scientific models had deemed impossible. The dome's transparent walls offered dramatic views of construction crews, establishing the first permanent settlement in the reclaimed region. The Phoenix Initiative exceeded our projections by 37%, Zhang explained to the gathered delegates. Within 5 years, this entire region will support diverse ecosystems and human habitation. A representative from the silicon-based Korvax, distant cousins to the Verax, inspected the soil composition data. These methods could benefit 17 currently condemned worlds in our sector alone, they noted. Would Earth share this technology? Of course, John replied without hesitation. The Phoenix Protocol will be made available to all Confederation species. This announcement caused a stir among the delegates. The Confederation operated on carefully negotiated trade agreements, with advanced technologies typically leveraged for maximum advantage. The concept of freely sharing such valuable techniques contradicted standard protocols. Later, during the cultural exchange portion of the gathering, Dr. Rice found herself approached by Ambassador Krelfax. The Verax diplomat's crystalline features had been modified since their first meeting. Subtle refinements that allowed more expressive communication with soft species. Your generosity with the bioremediation technology is unexpected, Krelfax stated. The Confederation Council predicted you would use it to negotiate favorable terms after your reclassification. Keeping it exclusive would limit its impact, Rise replied. Earth benefits more from a galaxy with fewer dead worlds than from favorable trade terms. This perspective defies traditional power dynamics, Krelfax observed. Perhaps traditional power dynamics need reconsideration, Rise suggested gently. As evening approached, the gathering moved to the dome's central garden, where Earth's diverse musical traditions were showcased beneath the stars. The Mithray delegation appeared particularly moved by a children's choir performing songs that had been composed in the early recovery zones. Venpor, now serving as the Confederation's official liaison to Earth, explained to curious delegates, these compositions originate from the first year after impact. They were created as teaching tools to help children process trauma while learning essential survival skills. General Mokveri, standing at the garden's edge, watched the performance with uncharacteristic reflection. Your species creates beauty from catastrophe, he noted to Zhang, who had joined him. The Verax record our victories in monuments designed to resist millennium of erosion. You commemorate your survival in songs taught to children. Zhang smiled. Different approaches to remembrance. Yes, Mokveri agreed. Your approach ensures the meaning transfers even as the form evolves, perhaps more resilient than ours. As the ceremony concluded, Dr. Rice released a ceremonial container of third-generation bioremediation organisms onto a small plot of still-damaged soil. The delegates watched as the microbes visibly activated, their bioluminescent markers spreading through the Earth, a living demonstration of transformation and progress. "This is humanity's gift to the Confederation," Zhang announced. "Not merely a technology, but a philosophy. Nothing broken remains beyond healing if we apply our collective strength to its renewal."